yourself a direction protected, but you still have lots of tough choices to make in life, and life might not go well for you. I mean, there's no guarantee on that score. All it's really doing is making your self-direction possible. Okay, so let's just say a few more words about property rights. For lack of a better way of putting it, I'm putting property rights as sort of the materialization of liberty, if you will. Okay? Human actions, what do? Well, they transform reality. Right? We take actions in a material world. We're not taking them in some other dimension, okay, at least that we know about. Right? We act with things, with objects, with material things. So actions are somehow transformations of the material world around us. And property concerns what's being transformed. It's that process of transforming the material world in some way. Okay? Pretty much saying the same thing. This I probably should have put in quotations because it comes directly out of Rand's essay, Man's Rights. Property rights are rights to actions. They're not rights to things. Now, this is not to say that things aren't involved. I've just been saying that, right? But the essential point about property rights is it is discussion of the right to action. Since all action takes place in the material world, okay, this does mean, of course, we're talking about protections of material things, but it confuses the issue to say that property rights are essentially about objects. They're not about objects. They're about people acting, and they act with objects, okay? So, yes, this is my computer, okay? But why is it my computer? Well, because I took certain actions that makes it my computer. I traded with you voluntarily, I pulled the money out of my wallet, I paid whoever owned the computer, etc., okay? Those actions make this mine, okay? And in ordinary conversation, it of course makes sense to say the computer is mine, so we're talking about the property right. But in fact, what's really being said is these are legitimate actions, okay? These actions which have transformed things in some way are protected actions that result in material things. Now, we can think of property rights in sort of non-material things as well, you know, sort of dimensions of, well, they're material, but things less obviously material, like radio waves or television waves or something like that, okay? They're also property rights or rights to ideas, copyrights and things like that. We can debate about whether they should be property rights at all. Okay, so if individuals are the sources of action, then what we say about them, they're also the sources of property rights as well. That is to say that we think of property rights as something that the state protects, but what I'm arguing in a sense is the state recognizes something. It doesn't invent something. The state recognizes something basic about human nature. That is, again, we are free individuals acting to transform the world around us. The state, what it does is provide the protection for doing so. Okay? That's very different from a perspective which says the property rights don't exist unless the state tells me they exist. Okay? It's a very different frame of mind. Okay? It's another way of saying, and I have some worries about this, but it's traditional, another way of saying property rights are natural rights. Okay? That is, there's something that the state recognizes as opposed to invents or creates for the first time. Okay, well, we've mentioned this, although we haven't used the word self-ownership too much, but it's a common word in libertarian writing to speak of self-ownership, that you own yourself. I've spoken of self-directedness, I like that better, but it's roughly the same idea. And then, of course, if you don't own yourself, then essentially you're a slave to somebody else. And we talked about this in my first talk as well, that respecting property rights is a form of respecting the person. If property rights come from individual actions, then, and you know, the things that are around me are connected to me and my choices, then respecting those things is a form of respecting me. And the same way, the same thing goes for you as well. And of course, we've been talking about this too, the consequence of this system is the creation of wealth for lots of reasons. Wealth comes from actions, and actions come from thoughts. This is going back to Rand's point about the centrality of the mind. Okay, we have gains from cooperation that occur through free trade and exchange. And I want to emphasize as well, stability of property rights helps in planning. To know that this thing is mine and I can sort of do with it what I want, I can make plans into the future. If you're going to take this away from me and I don't know when, the next moment, perhaps the next year, well, it's very hard for me to think about how I'm going to take that material reality I'm working with and do anything with it over the long term, okay? Probably what I'm going to do is nothing at all, okay? Depending on how much stability I have. Stability is fairly important. And then I'm basically drawing some sort of equalities here. You know, force and fraud are ways of violating property rights, or ways of interfering with creativity, or ways of lessening wealth. These connections are connections we've been drawing all weekend. Transactions, voluntary transactions, are a form of property rights, or a form of the right to liberty. These are also equivalent kinds of concepts that we've been using all weekend. We've been connecting these up together. Involuntary transactions may help some, but usually at the expense of other people. Okay, so we've got, you know, sort of rights, basic rights, we've got property rights, that connection. Well, another concept we've been using all weekend is something, the rule of law. The rule of law about men is a typical way this is talked about. Probably should say not people these days rather than men. But you get the idea, namely that we're supposed to be, all individuals are supposed to be under the rules, not some individuals and others above the rules. That's the basic idea.
The king.
The king, right, exactly. Yes. The formal properties of the rule of law have usually been identified as these three. For the rule of law to apply, it's got to be general. Sometimes the word universal is used. That means it applies to everybody, including the king, if you will. It has to be equal in application, that it applies to each of us in the same way. We talked a little bit about equality last night, and this is certainly one traditional use of the term equality, one that I would accept, one that is part of the classical liberal tradition. That the laws and rules have to apply in equal ways to all individuals. And finally, there must be certainty, as Tom pointed out yesterday. You know, to put something on paper or on the books, but not to enforce it, is not really the rule of law. It's the rule of men, if you will. Okay. Let's see what I've got here. Okay, so the rule of law is sort of an institutional way of, you know, institutionalizing the right of property or the right of liberty. That's what it does. We have these, let's call them sort of human rights, basic rights that people have, and then what is the role of